So far, in the encounters with Jesus we've explored this summer, we've seen what happens when someone who is broken and hurting encounters Jesus. Jesus provides healing. He quiets demons. He forgives sins. He reconciles human beings to God. An encounter with Jesus almost always leads to transformation and change, especially for those who choose to follow Jesus, who want to walk in His way. Last week, Pastor Brian preached from Jesus' Sermon on the Plain, which is Luke's counterpart to the Sermon on the Mount. And in the Sermon on the Plain, Jesus challenged His disciples to love your enemies and do good to those who hate you. Not an easy thing to do. A genuine encounter with Jesus, especially for those who choose to follow in Jesus' way, leads people to join Jesus in His mission of love to save the world. That's what happens. Jesus wasn't some kind of social media influencer whose whole purpose was to get likes on Facebook, right, or Instagram or any of those. He wasn't looking for fans. He was looking for disciples, for people who would follow in His footsteps, who would take on His mission to reconcile people with God and to share the gospel. As He said to Peter, James, and John, when He remember when He called them from their fishing boats? He said to them, now you will be fishing for people. Your mission is going to be my mission. And that's what happens when we have a genuine encounter with Jesus. The people who get healed become agents of healing. Jesus' mission becomes our mission. But not always. Unfortunately, the Gospels also include stories of people who encounter Jesus, who experience Jesus. He's in their presence, but they fail to be transformed by that. Right? So, that happens too. We know that because we read the stories in the Gospels. They come to Jesus with their minds already made up. And we're going to see that in the story that we read today. This story that we're going to read comes from near the end of Mark's Gospel during Jesus' final week in Jerusalem. So Mark tells us that Jesus comes into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, right? The triumphal entry. And in the evenings, He would go out to the Garden of Gethsemane on the edge of town. And during the day, He would come into the temple to teach. And Mark also tells us that the religious leaders and the politicians, and often they were the same people, they were waiting for Him. Oftentimes waiting with some kind of a trap. Every day there was a different kind of question that they thought that they could use to embarrass Him or trap Him in some way. But they had to be careful because Jesus was also very popular at this point. He was very popular with people, so they couldn't just come out and show their contempt. And so reading about these encounters with Jesus, I think it reminds me a lot of what we see in politics today. For instance, the two groups that we're going to read about are an awful lot like the far left and the far right that we see in our political parties. They have their minds made up. There's nothing that's going to change their minds. Not even Jesus. Didn't happen then, probably doesn't happen much today. Your mind's made up, your mind's made up. Now, these two antagonistic groups that we're going to be looking at today were the Herodians and the Pharisees. These are the two groups. And they were natural enemies. All right? The Herodians on the one side, they supported King Herod, like their name implies. They benefited from the tax system. They supported Roman rule. And so that was kind of one end of the political spectrum. The Pharisees on the other side, they hated the fact that Israel was occupied by the Roman government and by the Roman military. They thought that paying taxes to Caesar was an affront to their nation, and to their faith. And so most of the time, these two groups did not get along at all. But for whatever reason, Jesus annoyed both groups. Both groups wanted to see him ended. And so that's why we see them cooperating. This one time, they're cooperating. And they come up with what seems like a foolproof plan. So we're going to take a look at what they do and how they do it in Mark 12, verses 13 through 17. Then they sent to him some Pharisees and some Herodians to trap him in what he said. And they came to him, and notice how they approach him. Teacher, we know that you are sincere and show deference to no one, for you do not regard people with partiality, but teach the way of God in accordance with truth. Now they spring their trap. Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not? Should we pay them or should we not? But knowing their hypocrisy, Jesus said to them, why are you putting me to the test? Bring me a denarius and let me see it. And they brought him one. Then he said to them, whose head is this and whose title? They answered, the emperor's. Jesus said to them, give to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's. And they were utterly amazed at him. Now the Herodians, like I said, and the Pharisees were pretty sure they had Jesus cornered here. They thought they finally had a question, a gotcha question that would get him. Because if he said, yes, it's okay to pay the imperial tax to Caesar, then the Pharisees would have had him over a barrel. They could have said, oh, look at him. He doesn't agree with all of you people that hate Roman taxes and hate the Roman occupation. And so he would have been in trouble with almost every ordinary Jewish citizen, Jewish person at that point. But if he'd said, no, it's not all right, we all agree that it's an awful thing to have to pay taxes to Rome, well, then the Herodians could have accused him of treason against Rome, which, of course, they do anyway, 2 days later. But they could have accused him of it right then. So what we see in this story is that this particular encounter does not lead to transformation. It doesn't lead to healing. But what it does do is it reveals the motives and the characters of these religious leaders, these politicians. There isn't salvation, but there is definitely revelation. It becomes obvious that these people who are on the surface supposed to be committed to God, God's will isn't in their mind at all. They really don't care about that. Their mission and God's mission are two different things, entirely different things. And Jesus, this encounter also starts off in, I think, the smarmiest way possible, right? The compliments that they, you show partiality to no one, deference to no one. You're just after the truth. So that's how they start. And then they spring their trap. Basically what you might expect from a politician. But Jesus doesn't fall into the trap. He doesn't give them their yes or no answer. That's all he had to do was give them one answer, one of those answers, and he would have fallen into their trap. But he doesn't do that. Instead, he takes them to school. That's the best way to describe it. This is one of my favorite Jesus stories. So the first thing he does is he asks for a coin. And at that time, the coin of the realm was a Roman denarius, right? Who has a coin, he says. And when someone produces one, Jesus asks an important question. Whose image, important word, is on that coin? And even more importantly, whose title? Now, of course, they all knew whose image was on it. It was Caesar's image. And they also knew that there were some claims on that coin about who Caesar was. Claims for his divinity, that he was the son of the Most High, that he was worthy of worship, which is basically blasphemy, especially right there in the temple. So somebody produces this blasphemous coin right there in the temple, and then Jesus says, this is what utterly amazed them. Give to Caesar rather, what obviously belongs to Caesar. But give to God the things that belong to God. Now, the Herodians and the Pharisees might have been at different ends of the political spectrum and probably didn't agree on much else, but they were all Jewish. right? They all knew how in Genesis 1 God created human beings in His image, right? Whose image is on us? God's image. So yeah, that blasphemous coin, go ahead and give that to Caesar, right? But everything else, including us, all of that belongs to God. Like it says in Psalm 24, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. Over the years, I've heard people use this particular statement about rendering unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's. I've heard that as a justification for the separation of church and state. So you've got secular things over here, you got sacred things over here, divine things. That works to a certain extent, but that is not how Jesus thought. That really wasn't his thing. I mean, there was room for politics and for government, but Jesus thought a little differently than that. He wasn't a rebel or a revolutionary. There were those too. Even some among Jesus' own disciples were zealots. Before they met Jesus, they had been all about the violent overthrow of the Roman government. But that wasn't Jesus' thing. As Paul would later write in Romans, everyone must submit to governing authorities. For all authority comes from God, and those in positions of authority are placed by God. For Jesus, politics and politicians were a necessary part of the way that the world works, but still, for him, those things were secondary to God's kingdom, always. For Jesus, we belong to God. Not only are we made in God's image, but we have been called to bring about his kingdom on earth, even as it is in heaven. Right? Just like we say in the Lord's Prayer. As God's people, and especially as disciples of Jesus, that is our mission. Jesus said, yeah, pay your taxes, go ahead and do that, but don't forget what's of ultimate importance. I read a quote this week that made a lot of sense to me. Somebody named Stephen Mattson said, sometimes being a good Christian meant being a bad Roman. Christians were often accused of that. Christians were persecuted, martyred because of that. And so he goes on. So before you accuse people of being unpatriotic, ask yourself which empire they're actually serving. As citizens of God's kingdom, we're called to something bigger than partisan politics. We are. We are created in God's image. We belong to God all the time. There's no getting away from that. We bear his image. And sometimes that can be kind of hard for us. When I was a young pastor, not too far out of seminary, I realized there were certain times and places where I didn't want anyone to know I was a minister. It wasn't because I wasn't proud of my calling or my vocation or any of that. It's just that I knew from experience that as soon as that information got shared or announced, all conversation would come to an end, right? At a party somewhere, and what do you do? You know, conversation would come to an end. Next thing I know, people are apologizing to me for the things they've said or for, curse word, whatever. And I used to say, hey, there are times where I don't want to be Reverend Turner. I don't want to be Pastor David. I just want to be me. I don't want all that. What I soon learned, however, was that that's not an option. It's not an option for those who follow Jesus. It's not an option for me. It's not an option for you either. Not only are we created in God's image and carry that with us everywhere we go, we owe our very lives to God, but in our confession of faith and in our baptism, we aligned ourselves with Jesus' mission. We made his mission our mission. No matter where we go, we always stand for something bigger than ourselves. For a long time, whenever I heard that word mission, I always thought of missionaries. Probably a lot of you thought the same way. I thought of missionaries to Africa and Asia. I always assumed it was their job to do the mission, right? To fulfill the Great Commission and all that. Well, now, Africa and Asia are sending missionaries to us, to the United States, because we need the gospel here as much or more than probably anywhere in the world, right? So why are they sending people here? Because we need to hear the message, but also because there is no time and there is no place where Jesus' mission isn't in effect. We are all missionaries all the time. Jesus said, give to God what belongs to God. And the reason that everybody was amazed at that was because they knew the truth of it. Both groups, even though they differed from each other in so many things, they knew the truth of it. Everything belongs to God. Our lives, our work, our money, our mission, all of it. There's never a time or a place where that isn't true. Lately, I've been paying close attention to insurance commercials on TV. Now, I know that sounds like I've kind of gone in a weird direction from where I've been, but I want you to stick with me here because I think you're going to see it too. Like I did. Once my eyes were open, it was like, oh, there it is. So I hate commercials. I don't even like these insurance commercials either, but there's something to them. What I've noticed is that the characters selling insurance in these commercials have a devotion to their mission that won't stop, right? For instance, Limu, Emu, and Doug, right? He is always on message, always. Everywhere he goes. With Liberty Mutual Insurance, you only pay for what you need, right? He could be cooking dinner at the end of a long day. It's all he wants to talk about, right? Can't we talk about something else? Well, maybe. When he meets somebody in an elevator, this is the message a stranger. He's going to share this message. He pulls up alongside somebody in a car. This is the message he's going to share. And he's passionate about it. Flo. With Progressive Insurance, same way, right? She is always on message. So this commercial is a recent commercial, and it's kind of cute because they're all taking a break, right? From the mission. Supposedly, they're taking a break because they're all on all the time, right? Especially Flo. And so they're on the beach taking a break from selling insurance bundles and saving people money, and suddenly they overhear some people talking about how expensive it is to insure their boat and their RV. And even though she's on vacation, Flo springs into action. She can't help it. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but as she jumps up, she pulls her apron, her Progressive apron, out of her bag, and she's putting it on as she's going over to tell them the good news about bundling insurance and how much it can save them money. If you want to know what mission looks like, there you go. That's what it looks like when someone is on a mission. The only difference is that we're not selling home insurance or car insurance or saving people money with insurance bundles. Our mission is to seek after God's kingdom. Our mission is to love God with heart, soul, strength, and mind, and love our neighbors unconditionally like God does. Our mission, the mission that we adopted here at First Christian Church that guides us, is to be and to share the good news of Jesus Christ. There's our mission. Give to Caesar the things that belong to Caesar. There's no escaping our obligation as citizens, right? But give to God what belongs to God, which is pretty much everything. Now, the world will try to derail that mission. The world will try to conform you to an identity that doesn't look anything like Jesus. And that pressure is going to come from the left, it's going to come from the right, it's going to come from all around you. They don't want you to look like Jesus. They don't want you to be on mission. So my message for you today is resist it. Resist that pressure. Like Flo from Progressive, take your apron with you everywhere you go, just in case. Always, the Apostle Peter said, always be prepared to give an answer for the hope that is in you. That's what he's talking about. That's what Peter was talking about. Always be prepared to give an answer for the hope that is in you. You can do that anywhere, anytime. The Apostle Peter also said this, you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for God's own possession. That's who you are. That you may proclaim the excellence of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. That is who you are. And that is what you are called to do. Now go and make it so. Let's pray. Holy God, we are filled with the power of your love. We see the truth so clearly in Scripture, but it's also so hard for us. It's hard for us to live out that mission every day, to keep that passion and that enthusiasm alive. We are surrounded in so many ways by forces that are trying to pressure us, trying to conform us to this world when we want to be conformed to your Son and to you. You have called us out of darkness into the light. Help us to always proclaim your excellence. Help us to shepherd others into that light as well, because that's what you called us to do. Help us always to keep our eyes focused on Jesus, who is the Savior of our lives and in whose name we now pray.